President facing the press for the first time since his debate with former President Trump. Biden pushing back on calls to drop out of the race.
I think I'm the most qualified person to run for president. I beat him once, and I will beat him again.
And joining us now for his reaction is former SEC Chair Jay Clayton. He's a CNBC contributor. So since the debate, we saw a lot of teleprompter events, and we know that he can still do that. We did see with Stephanopoulos, that was all off the cuff, theoretically, and you may or may not think of his performance there. But last night was extemporaneous, and maybe you disagree. My thought was he held it together, was COVID, lucid, seemed knowledgeable on foreign policy, and was a far cry from the debate. I mean, there was you can snicker about Vice President Trump and, Putin, and Zelensky actually looked like he thought that was kind of funny. But in general, if you think that he's not there mentally at all, that's not what you saw last night.
No, but Joe, we've looked at this, and I think it is in the context of how would a corporation handle this? Because it is a communications issue, and the issue is still on the table. Is he capable of being president of the United States? What is people who are reacting very positively last night? I believe they're doing something that happens way too often, which is recency bias, confirmation bias.
Do you think Donald Trump could get through the board of directors of a corporation?
Do I think Donald Trump? I think Donald Trump could respond to questions.
Not respond. I'm asking you whether a corporate board would keep him as a CEO, given a lot of the stuff that's happening. I think that's a false equivalency.
No, I don't think it's a false equivalency because the context is the same. The context is the same. Are you able to go out and communicate and respond and express the issues in a way that you instill confidence in your constituency? Are you able to do that? That is a big job of the President of the United States. And he did fine last night. But if you look at the data points over the last 2 weeks, okay, it's not fine.
When the Democrats in all the different states were voting during the primaries, do you think that Joe Biden that we saw last night was different than the Joe Biden from 6 months ago or 8 months ago or 9 months? The Democrats fully knew that this was the guy. He looked the same to me. He said the same to me. They make my I get furious listening to the stuff that he said, but it was the same guy. Oh. Corporations are causing inflation, guns. It was all the same stuff.
Joe, I think you're making my point.
What is
my point?
Well, they should have thought about this before. Nothing's changed.
Nothing has changed except now you're under the spotlight of scrutiny. And everything he is saying, every time he appears, the test is much more rigorous than it was 6 months ago. These are real tests. Did he pass last night? Yeah. Did he fail in the debate? Did he fail? I thought he failed with George Stephanopoulos. I didn't come away. Look.
Didn't Democrats fail by rubber stamping him as the nominee? Is it his fault or is it their fault?
I think the real question is...
And the media's fault.
Were they rigorous enough? Did they think about this? And look, clearly they did not. Who was the winner last night? I think the Republican Party was the winner last night because this issue is still front and center, and in any crisis, it's going to be front and center as we go forward.
Okay, and you are fully aware of his ability to stay if he wants. But you, I think, at the same time, would give it 90% he's not the nominee? Is that where you are?
I'm at a very high percentage.
That he's not. So how does that happen then?
Well,
God's not coming down unless you go tell him.
Look, I would say we're on a trend to reality, and reality is going to catch up.
I just don't know what that looks like, considering his inner circle supposedly they're just as strident as he is about his plans to stay.
Well, look at how many members of Congress.
17 out of how many are there? And they're not even big. Jerry Nadler?
Some of them I know well.
You do?
And are people of substance and rigor.
Are they in districts where they might lose?
I don't think so.
That's not why they're doing it?
That's not why they're doing it. I don't think Jim Himes is worried about losing. Jim Himes is a deeply substantive, experienced guy, ranking member on the Intelligence Committee. He has There is no one I know who is more committed to the Democratic Party and to the betterment of the middle class.
If the debate hadn't happened, do you think he'd have a problem with 4 more years? He was fully on board with Biden. Why is he not now? Because the poll numbers went down.
Let me give these folks, the Democratic Party, who we're painting with a broad brush.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of them had direct access on a substantive basis to the president in a time of what I would say is deep engagement.
Yeah, well, I had no access to him, and we knew exactly what was happening. So,
but they were relying on their surrogates, right?
We knew. Why wouldn't they? All you got to do is watch the TV.
At this point, though, does this change the outcome of the ultimate race? I mean, the longer that Biden stays in, the more sort of wounded his campaign becomes, whether it be because of just the image problems or the fundraising issues that are happening as we speak, with donors just not boycotting, et cetera. And so, at a certain point, it wounds them if he stays in for longer and lets this go on. So what do they gain? I mean, what will be gained?
What to watch for, okay? How much is the brand, the Democratic brand, not the Biden brand, but how much is the Democratic brand continuing to be damaged by this kind of scrutiny on the day-to-day basis? And if he has future gaffes or future problems and people are going out and defending him when it's clear that that's not really where he is, that will greatly damage the brand.
You think the average American is going to say, I don't want to vote Democrat anymore because they hid him?
Yeah, I think people
like
do,
that will register.
The worst thing you can do to people is to lie to them. People do not like that. They're okay with having differences on policies. They're okay, but when you stand up and you say, you know what, again, in a corporation, everything's fine when you know it's not fine, that corporation loses its brand identity, loses its quality very quickly.